All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this new seminar of the Exploring Worldview seminar series that we're organizing from Groningen. We're very happy to have you. The seminar series, we started it last year in September, and we go through we invite people who work on worldview or who use the concept worldview to study things. And so far, we've had discussions on worldview in neo-Calvinist theology, worldview in anthropology and religious studies, as well as more practical things from last time onwards, how worldview may or may not help us understand collaborations and do collaborations between scientists and indigenous people or local communities in action research. And today we are going to look at how worldview is being used in religious education or to complement or replace religious education. We will have a roundtable this time rather than a single presentation with three speakers. Professor Trevor Cooling from Canterbury Christ Church, who will tell us about worldview and religious education in the UK. Markus Davidsen from Leiden University, coming from religious studies, who will tell us about the Dutch case. And Leni Franken from Antwerp University, who will tell us about what's going on in Flanders, where in all three contexts, there are various pushes to move towards worldview education and also limits or obstacles to these processes. I'll let Todd continue.
Okay. Since I don't, maybe Victor, afterwards you will read the questions, but let me first introduce the topic for today. So Victor and I, as many of you know, are involved in this project on the history of worldview. Let's say the history of its affordances, what it is that this concept is able to do in history, who's used it and so on. And we're particularly interested in its relationship to struggles over religion and politics. So we're interested in its apologetics, the apologetic use of the term worldview. And so we're also interested in how it moves from one domain to another. So in the context, for example, of the Netherlands, it was a term of the culture wars of the 19th century. It entered in particularly strongly from Abraham Kuyper, who I think Markus will mention, but was a reformed, conservative political action activist. And he was pushing for having schools based on worldviews. Again, I'm sorry if I take something away from what Markus wants to talk about, but he was doing politics of this so-called school struggle in the Netherlands, which was the most contentious issue in their culture war prior to World War I. And what was interesting was in 1917, the Dutch government had the so-called pacification, where they agreed to create Christian schools, or to separate the schools according to confession, let's say. And the term worldview then appears in some government documents already in 1917, where the government says we're not going to fight over lifeview, levensbeschouwing. So again, that's for us the starting point for thinking about how the state starts to use the term worldview to mediate between groups, right? So we go from polarization to kind of mediation. And I've been particularly interested in how it enters into the field of education for some time. So this project's been evolving slowly. And in a prior version with a much grander budget, we were going to do something very extensive on religious education in schools. And in that context, I got to know Trevor and Markus. And I think that Lois Lee, who I saw is also here, hello, Lois, that I think Lois pointed out Trevor to me. And so just to quickly mention the three speakers. So each speaker has a different disciplinary point of view all three of them are both engaged in trying to think about reform of religious education, as well as, let's say, doing theoretical work, I believe, on the concepts involved in pedagogy, and especially this term of worldview or levensbeschouwing. And so Trevor is a theologian, but also a theorist of education. Markus comes from religious studies and is also now in a prominent position in designing religious education. And Leni is a philosopher, but is also very involved in the practical political questions around religious education. So we have a great sort of set of speakers because they're all engaged on a theoretical level with the concepts and also really involved in shaping educational policy in their respective countries. We have a series of questions that we posed to each of them. We're going to ask them to hopefully stick to about 15 minutes of introduction. Leni's going to be at a little disadvantage because she's not able to enter yet, I believe. So we're going to start with Trevor, then hear from Markus, and then hear from Leni. Afterwards, there will be a time for discussion in which also we want our three panelists to compare notes, but also we'll open it for all the speakers. Would you be willing, Victor, to read out the three questions that we proposed to the panelists?
Yep. So the three questions are the following. First, under which historical circumstances did talk of worldview or lifeview, levensbeschouwing, enter into existing structures of religious education in schools? How does this reflect societal changes such as secularization, depillarization, and diversification? Second question, how do teachers understand worldview in England or levensbeschouwing in the Netherlands and Flanders? Are there better ways of approaching worldview in education? And number three, how does worldview figure in current efforts to reform religious education? What controversies does it stir up? And what position do you personally advocate in reform?
Great. Okay. And I hope that the panelists don't mind, but I will remind you after 15 minutes that you should hopefully come to a finish. Okay. Don't mean to be rude, but we want to, keep it lively. So Trevor, I think Victor will help you with the PowerPoint.
He will. Yeah.
Can you see the slides now?
Yes.
I can, so I hope everybody else can. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Thank you very much, Todd and Victor, for the invitation. I think describing me as a theologian is slightly over painting what I actually am. I see myself as an educationalist who is very interested in the interaction between theology and the discipline of education. So that's really where I'm positioned. So I'm going to start with the situation in the UK, but it's not actually the UK, it's England we're talking about. We have 4 separate countries in the United Kingdom. The word united, again, might be an oversimplification of the relationships. The education systems are different. So I am talking about England. And in our legislation, religious education has been there for since 1944, and it's made religious education compulsory for all students in all state-funded schools from 5 through to the age of 18. So it's got a strong position in legislation, but the schools are quite diverse. So within that state-funded system, we do have religious character schools. So we have large numbers of Catholic schools, large numbers of Church of England schools, and quite a few of other religious traditions. And they're all meant to work under this common legislation about religious education. Now, I have got an AI assistant because we couldn't get my PowerPoint to work from my computer. So Victor is my AI assistant who will be working on trying to keep up with where I am. Now, what happened a few years ago is that an organization called the Religious Education Council set up a commission to look at religious education, because it was felt that we were not really developing the subject in ways appropriate to the modern context. And we asked them to produce a report which, if you like, rethought the vision for the subject. And this is their vision, which they came up with. And the things to note about it are really that it's both a response to the changing context, so hence the language of religious and non-religious. It introduces the word worldviews into that classification, and it focuses on the notion that everybody has a worldview, and that may be very varied. And if you look at our demographics from censuses, increasing numbers of young people particularly will say that they have no religious tradition, by which they're usually, I think, talking about institutional commitments or identification with sort of institutional Christianity or Islam or whatever. Now, I chaired that work, so that's my involvement in it. So I chaired the work of the RE Council, both in terms of what the Commission did and then interpreting what they then did following that. So I'm briefly now going on to the next slide, going to show you a little bit about the transition that happened as a result of the work of the Commission. And this is where, with only 15 minutes, I'm going to rather simplify and therefore distort the actual position. But in order to get the general idea across, one has to do that. But up until the Commission in 2018 and its report, most teachers would have adopted what would be called a world religions approach. And the idea would be that the children learn about different religions as part of an introduction to the multi-faith society that they live in. And a symbol would have been added there, what they call a happy humanist, which is the humanist symbol, into this picture of the religious nature of the world. So it would be a religious and non-religious tradition which would be taught. So the emphasis is on understanding religion. So go on to the next slide, Victor. What this produced was, I suppose, an increasing concern about where this was going. Okay, if you click again, as to how the curriculum was constructed. And there it comes. What I think happened in the sort of worst case scenario was that teachers regarded their content as a series of boxes by each tradition, which were independent of each other and were often opened separately, and information was taken out and then put back in, and then in the next bit of the curriculum they open another box. Now again, I'm parodying, please realize that, but it was happening. What the Commission did was to suggest that we need to rethink what we're doing. It's a move from just covering information as much as you can to get understanding of as many different traditions as you can. And the shift was to the notion that everyone has a worldview, or another way of putting this is nobody stands nowhere. And we all interpret the information that we receive from the perspective of our own worldview, of where we stand. This is a human characteristic. So what it was hoped was that the subject would introduce young people to the notion of worldview, and through conversation with religious traditions would learn to reflect on how human beings develop their worldview, and also to understand how they can interpret and discuss with others about different worldviews, and also become much more reflective about their own worldview formation. So it's a move away from the notion of an objective study of religion. So if we go into the next slide, so it's a shift of focus from what I've called here information transmission to reflexive dialogue and making sound judgments. Okay, so that's question one. What's the history? Question two. So if you go on to the next slide, teachers' understandings of worldview education. Well, I've sort of slightly twisted the thing to misunderstandings, because the conversation that followed this initiative threw up a lot of misunderstandings from what was actually being suggested. Some people interpreted it as adding yet more content. So it was adding to the already overcrowded curriculum by putting in more worldviews. Others saw it specifically as a focus on bringing humanism into the curriculum. Others saw it as teaching sort of everything, so expanding it to veganism or all the other sorts of things which people talk about in society as really mattering. And it was also seen in academic circles as a controversial term. Indeed, quite a lot of the British academics saw it as a unique term, not understanding actually the sort of thing that Todd described that was going on in other parts of the world, like in the Netherlands, for many, many years. So we've been having lots of debates about what this all really means. So that's now I'm going to go on to question three and talk about the reform that actually lies behind all this. So in the work that's going on in the UK, in England at the moment, we're using the notion of worldview being two different forms. One is about the organized or institutional worldview, the sort of structured notion which you find in traditions of Islam, Christianity, and so on. And then there's the term personal worldview. And what we're seeing is that we're trying to create a classroom experience which enables there to be a conversation, interaction between the organizational worldviews that children learn about traditionally in RE and the personal worldviews, both of adherents of those traditions and of the students themselves. And along the way, we've got the notion that they also have to look at some of the influences on world formation in the modern world. So that's where things like scientism, veganism, and so on come in. Okay, next slide. So what we're doing is looking at the interaction between the two horizons of the organized religions and the students. So it's very much based on a hermeneutical understanding of education. So if you go to the next slide. So what the council have done, the Rich Education, is to produce a handbook for curriculum developers, which tries to show how this makes a difference to how RE is encountered and what the move from, if you like, information transmission to a hermeneutical approach looks like. So if you go to the next slide. And what we've done is produce what we call a national statement of entitlement. If you click again, Victor, it's got three components. The first is what we've called the content, which basically are what are the features of worldview and worldview formation that students need to understand. The second is called engagement, and that's looking at the notion of how the teacher introduces it into the classroom. And there are three elements of that. One is that we use case studies of living traditions, people's experience of those traditions. So we don't talk so much about Islam as a Muslim experience of Islam. Secondly, we emphasize that they need to learn how to be good interpreters and good at dialogue. They need to learn those two skills. And thirdly, that they need to take a multidisciplinary approach. So theology, philosophy, religious studies, history, and so on. And for each of those statements, there's a short version for the curriculum developer to use and a longer version. Here's another expression of it. Sorry, I didn't say about the third thing. The position of the pupil is very important in this approach, and it's terrible that I forgot it. But what it is actually it's a focus on making sure the pupil is reflecting on how their worldview impacts the way in which they operate as a student, and how their learning may enable them to develop their own understanding of their worldview. So if you go to the next slide. So these three components can be presented diagrammatically. So first of all, there's the content. Then there's the engagement, which you might see as the tools that the children need in order to be good at this subject. And then thirdly, there's their own perspective. So it's presented as an exploration for them. So last slide then. The last question is about the controversies that have emerged around this approach. I mean, generally, I don't know whether Lois would agree with me on this, but generally, I think it's being accepted and used increasingly by teachers and curriculum developers. But some have seen the emphasis on the pupil as an attack on traditional scholarship. Some have seen it as promoting secularism. So there was a book criticizing it called The Triumph of the Secular. Basically, that's anti-non-religious traditions being included. Other people saw it as promoting religious faith because they objected to the idea that the implication was that everybody has religious type faith. And some were objecting to it because they saw it as promoting relativism, because they said it's just making RE into opinions. And there's a whole epistemological thing there, which if you want to ask me about, I can answer. That's it. Thank you very much.
You're perfectly on time, Trevor. You even have another minute in case you want to add anything to what you said.
Well, perhaps I can add about the epistemological thing then and the relativism, because one of the things that I think we're also trying to emphasize is what we call critical realism, which is the idea that there are things to discover out there. You don't just construct them. But as human knowers, we are always involved in some form of construction because we are interpreters, not just receivers. And that means that learning how to make judgments and learning how to be wise interpreters is very important. So it's not relativism, and it's not a sort of very neutral, objective approach either.
Super. Thank you. I guess I'll save my question for afterwards for everyone, but I'm kind of curious for each of the three speakers where they first started to think about the term worldview and what was the inspiration. We can do that afterwards, perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, Markus. And I should have mentioned, so Trevor's one of the authors of this important report from 2018, which recommended this major change to the English and Welsh schools regarding religious education, and it made a big splash in the media. It stirred up some controversy in 2018. Markus is the intellectual leader of LERFO, which is we call it a kind of a think tank behind thinking of religious education in the Netherlands. So he's also, I think, playing an important role here in the Netherlands. So turning it over to you, Markus.
Thank you, Todd. I'm trying to see if I can share my screen. Does this work?
We can see it, but not in the presenting view.
Also, yeah.
As a slide.
I'm not so familiar with Google Meet.
Well, if you just on your PowerPoint, just click the slideshow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I tried to do that after I shared it.
Otherwise, I can do the same as I did for Trevor if you want. Because
does this not work? If it's now on. It's in the presentation view for me.
No, it's not for us. It's not for us. Either you can share your screen instead of just sharing the window. That works.
Let me try to do that.
Or I can, as I said, I can do it for you if you'd like.
Let me just try to share. my screen. And then get this. Okay, is this better?
And yeah, exactly.
Yes,
No, it
perfect.
works. Thank you.
All right. Now I don't see you, but I'll imagine you being there. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Netherlands, and you've just listened to Trevor. You're going to hear a lot of stuff that's similar, but you're also going to see that we in the Dutch case often use different terminology to catch some of the same issues and points. But here we go. I'm going to try to cover the first two of the team's questions in one go, speaking about levensbeschouwing or lifeview, which is a core Dutch term, how that is in Dutch education now. And then I'm going to cover the third question in my second part of this very small slideshow, but talking about some recent developments coming out of this expert center, Leerpo, that Todd introduced, and in which I'm the leader of the curriculum task force. Okay, so here we go. Just to understand the Dutch case, a brief historical sketch. So in Dutch schools, religion or godsdienst, which is a Dutch term for religion, used to be taught in all schools by teachers. And that was the case until the French occupation during the Napoleonic Wars. And then in the 19th century, we have a gradual introduction of the system that we know today, the Dutch call the dual system, meaning that there are two types of schools, public schools and private schools. And what you get here, that is that in the public schools, and now that is about a third of all schools, they are neutral, but the church, or now also an increasing number of religious organizations, come in as guests outside regular school hours, and then they can teach religion to a group of students that are taught only about their own denomination. So we have Protestant, Catholic, Islamic, and so on today. In the private schools, that's 2/3 of the schools. What you used to have here was the school subject godsdienst, religion, being taught originally by a local minister. What you then see is, so I'm painting with a very big brush here, obviously, as Trevor also pointed out. In the 20th century, that you see that generally it becomes, again, religion teachers that take over teaching the school subject. But curiously enough, it was not until 2017 that this was put into the law that only teachers could teach religion in schools, and that ministers and imams could no longer do it. Now, two things are more important to us. These are two different core developments in the 80s. And you will see here that it's not the term worldview that's at stake here, but two other Dutch terms, but they touch upon some of the dimensions that worldview in an English context would cover. Now, development one is that in 1985, spiritual currents, or geestelijke stromingen, became a mandatory knowledge domain in primary schools. And that spiritual currents here should not be understood as the world religions plus humanism. And that marks the introduction of the world religions paradigm in Dutch primary, but also secondary education, so a bit later than in England. Another important development was the introduction in 1987 of an alternative school subject in private schools, so in the Christian schools. So rather than teaching the school subject godsdienst of religion, schools were from then on allowed to teach the alternative subject levensbeschouwing or lifeview, and an increasing number of schools adopted this school subject. Now, what did that then look like? Now you see here, so where in the English context, the school subject is called religious education, there are actually two different school subjects in the Dutch context. So there used to be just a godsdienst, and the way that school subject was taught until the late 90s is what could be phrased as teaching into religion. So socialization into one particular confession. Now, this way of teaching religion also exists today. I think about 10% of the more Orthodox Protestant schools teach it like this still. Then we have about 25% of the schools that are more so liberal Protestants. They they teach, they still call their school subject Godsdienst, religion. They now have a combination of teaching into and teaching about. So this is the world religions paradigm. And then we get to levensbeschouwing, that curiously enough was adopted mainly by Catholic schools. This was driven by a generation of teachers who had grown up in the Catholic Church, but have become estranged from it. So secularization plays a role. So also because after the Second Vatican Council, the Dutch Catholic Church actually became more orthodox on the institutional level, and that was in tension with the increasingly liberal Catholic populace in the Netherlands. So that led many Catholics to break with the church, also many Catholic schools. So most of these Catholic schools are now no longer on the bishop's authority. They call the school subject levensbeschouwing, and they focus on the formation of the pupils' personal worldview. So that means their values, their beliefs, and their identity. But actually not so much beliefs, more values and identity. And what you see if you browse through textbooks that are used in schools who call the school subject levensbeschouwing, you will see that it is not so much traditional worldviews that are taught, but more themes. And those can be social themes such as friendship, relation, sexuality, fashion, the body, and it can be ethical and societal themes such as abortion, climate change, and living with diversity. Now, what we see here is that often, increasingly, levensbeschouwing in these schools is only taught in lower secondary education, whereas these schools then in upper secondary education do not carry through with the school subject on religion, but have introduced philosophy instead. And that is something from as somebody who trains school teachers to teach the religion subject that I consider a threat. But if you look at objectively, you see a drift from religion and theology towards some kind of life philosophy. Right. I think I just skip this one. I move to the recent developments. Now, as Todd said about, we now have this expert center, LiveView and religion in secondary education, or abbreviated LERVO, that was launched in 2018. As in 2020, I had been the leader of the, I think I'm called project leader curriculum within this expert center. So what is it? It is a very broad coalition of all the universities and universities of applied sciences that train teachers to teach in secondary education. Another member is the professional organization of religion teachers, but also, and that's important, the umbrella organizations of the different types of, the different segments of the pillarized school system. So important here is FEOS, that organizes all the Christian, both Protestant and Catholic schools, and FOS ABB, which is a similar organization for the public schools. They are all members here. We'll come together in order to strengthen education in religion and worldview across secondary education. But one of the things that we do is that we work on a core curriculum. Important to note here is that because of the strong separation of church and state in the Netherlands, the Ministry of Education does not design a curriculum for the religion subject in school. That's left to the field itself to do that. Now, we have here then come together as a field to make a curriculum together in order to strengthen the profile and also the status of our school subject. And we now suggest a new name for the school subject. We suggest to call it levensbeschouwing en religie. So not just godsdienst, not just levensbeschouwing, but to combine the two. And we also write a series of books. One of them, you can see the cover here, just came out 2 weeks ago, Opening New Worlds, Perspectives on Levensbeschouwing, Worldview, Lifeview, and Religion. So what are we doing? We're building this new curriculum. It has two aims. what you'd call worldview of religious literacy, meaning that the pupils gain some knowledge and insight and overview. And then another term that is difficult to translate into English. So in Dutch, it is levensbeschouwelijke mondigheid. In German, you have the term Mündigkeit that you also know from the Bildung tradition. You encountered it from Humboldt, for example. So it's about being responsible or taking responsibility and being reflective, those kind of things. And the way we want to achieve these things with the pupils is to teach them about, these are then the two components of the curriculum, a number of traditions, religions and non-religious worldviews, and we approach these traditions through what we call the perspectives. Perspectives or approaches or ways of looking that come with a series of questions, methods, theoretical insights. I'm going to mention some of them. You can see here we have 10 of them, but I'm going to mention them in a second. Now, I was asked to focus, to not tell you every detail, but to focus on the effect then of using the term levensbeschouwing in working or reworking the curriculum. So here we go. In terms of how we think about which traditions to treat, here we actually take up one of the things that Trevor considered a misunderstanding of the English report that's been worked in here as a positive thing. We want to not only look at the world religions, but we actually add humanism and non-institutional religion to the traditions that can be covered. Important to say here is that it does not necessarily then mean that we need to add or to cover more traditions. Rather, we want to focus not only on the different traditions or worldviews sort of as concrete entities beside each other. Much more, we want to teach pupils to think about worldview and religion in the singular, how that works. That means you don't need necessarily to cover all the world religions. At least you do not need to cover them all in equal depth. Now, this is also to say that for us, while we also recognize the distinction between an organized or institutional levensbeschouwing on the one hand and a personal levensbeschouwing on the other hand, the way our curriculum is set up, the organizational worldview is, that level is the primary. So for us, then the levensbeschouwing is the ideas, the norms, and the practices and communities that help individuals interpret the life and the world. So that is the tradition. So levensbeschouwing is, yeah, that's that. So, and then religion is in a particular kind of levensbeschouwing, namely those that assume the existence of a trans-empiric dimension of the world besides the everyday empirical dimension. There's another effect, and that is that thinking about or toying with the term levensbeschouwing also fed into the perspectives that we have identified as important lenses with which to look at our school subject. And it feeds in to this in different ways. So one thing is that we are very interested in teaching pupils how worldviews work. And some of our perspectives provide help with this. Those are the phenomenological, anthropological, historical, societal, and comparative and demographic perspectives. So what they help to pupils to look at and understand is how worldviews are structured. That is the phenomenological perspective. How they develop. That's the historical perspective. The variation within them, touched upon by the comparative and anthropological perspective, and the effect they have on people. Another perspective that we have include in the curriculum is what might be called in English the existential perspective. And so this is about which existential experiences and questions lead to the formation of worldviews in the first place. So that all has to do with the understanding of organized worldviews, but personal worldview also come in. And you see that here in the second, the third, or fourth bullet. So what we call the personal perspective is about having pupils reflect on their own beliefs, values, and identity, whether those are religious or non-religious. And the ethical perspective teaches them how to come to a well-weighed judgment in an ethical dilemma. And then there's also the meta perspective that is about critical thinking. What's important here is that we want to teach pupils how to identify prejudices and hidden motives and biases, both in religious texts and in texts about religion, in news coverage, for example, but also in their own thought. I think this is also, as I understand, Trevor, an important thing in the English debate. Now, probably we are trying to do too much, but it's an objection that I will allow you to raise in the discussion. But this is the overview of the way that things are moving in the Netherlands. So, thank you.
Super, thank you, Markus. Very interesting to see also the similarities to the UK, but we could talk about that. So we're next going to hear Leni. Welcome to the meeting. Are you there? I think, well, I saw that Leni's there in the chat. May have to turn your microphone on. Can you turn on your microphone, Leni? Oh,
Yes.
Super.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. So, so I introduced the others briefly, Leni. I'm sorry you had to join a little bit late, but we're really grateful that you did come, even though you're obviously very busy today. Leni is a philosopher and a researcher at the University of Antwerp, and has been involved in public discussions about religious education and religion in the public sphere in Flanders. So the others were talking for 15 minutes. I think Markus a bit more. So go ahead and take your time. And afterwards, we'll have a bit of chance for comparison. And then maybe also, Leni, you can be brought up to date about what Trevor said and so on.
Okay. How do I share my slides?
So at the bottom, in the middle, there's something called Present Now.
Yes.
It's the box with an arrow, and then you can share either the window. But
window. Yes,
screen,
I see. Yeah.
Sometimes sharing the screen works better.
But I can't see it in my window, which is very strange.
Otherwise, I can do the slides for you if you want.
Wait, maybe I can. But is it this one? Not sure. No, here it is.
No, that's just the.
No, it's just the.
Yeah.
Strange. No. Yeah, if you can.
Yeah, I have your slides up, so I can.
Okay.
If you want.
Sorry.
No. It's a bit tricky always.
Okay, there it is. But can I then?
So then I'll have to I'll have to move.
Okay, yeah, that's okay.
And you tell me just when to move.
Okay.
Can you see? Yes, you can see.
Yeah. Good. This is the first one. Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, you can go to the next one. This one. Yeah. Just very briefly to start with something about religious affiliation in Belgium, because that's, I think, important in order to know the status of RE and how it fits into the sociological reality. So we've always been a Roman Catholic nation, but since the 1960s, Belgium is largely characterized by secularization and by increasing religious diversity. So the numbers of Catholics, it's still relatively high, but not compared to where we have been before. But as you can see in red, most Belgian people do not have a religious affiliation. And this number is even higher among youngsters, so those who are in primary and secondary schools, often do not identify with a particular religion. Yeah, you can move on. Okay, and then if we compare this these numbers with the educational context, then you can see that there is a discrepancy between both, because most of the schools in Belgium, and especially in Flanders, I will only speak about Flanders today, but the situation is more or less the same in the other parts of Belgium. So most of the schools, as in the Netherlands, are faith-based schools, and they are only in the Netherlands you have Protestant and Catholic, but in Belgium it's only Catholic. So 60% of the primary schools and 70% of the secondary schools. What does this Catholic mean? It means that the schools are based on Roman Catholicism, so that's their mission or vision is inspired by Roman Catholicism. As in the Netherlands, these schools are fully subsidized by the state, so it's the same as in state schools. And very interesting, I think, for today is that the Roman Catholic religious education is a mandatory school subject in primary and secondary Catholic schools. It's organized for 2 hours in secondary schools and 2 or 3 hours in primary schools. You have there the situation that all the students, whether they are Catholic or not, they are all in the same classroom, so we can call it integrative religious education with Wanda Albert's words, so they are not separated. Catholic religious education is, it's based on the Catholic tradition. At the same time, there is openness for diversity, for plurality, and there's also a focus on identity formation, religious or levensbeschouwelijke identity formation of the students. So that's a situation in most of the schools. So most of the Flemish students have 2 hours a week Roman Catholic religious education. And then the other schools, 30% of the primary and 40% of the secondary schools, are state schools. We call them official schools, officiële scholen. And they are constitutionally required to be neutral, which means, and that's also part of the constitution, that they should respect the religious and philosophical views of the parents and of the students. So that's their official mission. And in these schools, and that's also part of the constitution, religious education is organized in 6 recognized religions and also in non-denominational ethics, which is in Flanders a course that is organized by the recognized Humanist Association. So we have 7 courses, and all these courses are organized by a religious or secular humanist organization, and it's based on the recognition of the system of recognizing religions we have since Napoleon, actually. So here in these schools, religious education is a separative religious education. Students are separated according to their religion or worldview. Yeah, and it's organized, I mentioned it already, in a denominational way, and it's also mainly confessional. Some courses are, let's say, more open for the plurality within the classroom, but other courses, for instance, Orthodox Christianity or Judaism, that's, let's say, it's more the traditional confessional or even catechetical way of teaching. Yes. Okay, here you can see the numbers. I will not say too much about that, but you can see that the numbers in green, that's the course that is mainly chosen. That's non-confessional or non-denominational ethics. So it's the main subject in primary as well as in secondary schools. And then you see the other Roman Catholic RE in primary education, and it's then on the 3rd place in secondary education. And for Islamic RE, oh no, they are both. Excuse me, no, and for Islamic RE, it's the 3rd one in primary as well as in secondary school. So these are the main school subjects, and Islam has, let's say, the last 10 years, the number of students it increased. It expanded enormously. So yep. And if you compare this was only the last slide was only about the courses in the official schools, so in the state schools. But here you have a very different picture, because these are the numbers of students in RE in all the school networks. So it includes the Catholic schools as well. And then you have, of course, a very, very different picture, because then you see that in primary schools as well as in secondary schools, between 72.6 and 75% of the students is enrolled in Roman Catholic RE. And then the number non-denominational ethics, it's, let's say, 13-14%, and then Islamic RE 10 and 7.5. So I think it's very important to notice this difference between, of course, the Catholic religious education, which is because there are so many Catholic schools, and because it's mandatory in these schools, the number is now very different in this slide. Okay, as mentioned, we have, as in the Netherlands and as in the UK and so on, we are characterized now by secularization and increasing religious diversity. And that raises, of course, questions about how we organize religious education. Also broader about the whole school network. Is it still a good idea to have this pillarized education system or not? But I will not go into detail here. But of course, the organization of religious education is also a challenge, because the students in Catholic schools, but also in official schools, but in the Catholic schools, students are often no Catholic at all. And there has been some research about it, and then they say, like, let's only 20% or something identifies as Christian, and many of them even don't like Catholicism. So it's a very strange situation, actually. Okay. So in spite of this increasing secularization and diversity, we have this Roman Catholic school subject taken by 70 to 75% of the students, and it has been a challenge for Catholic schools to rethink their Roman Catholic religious education subject. And so there have been new curricula. They have been introduced, I think it's just a few years ago. I think it was 23. And in these curricula, the pupils' religious growth is emphasized, and in Dutch it's the levensbeschouwelijke groei. So religious is not like strictly religious, but it's worldview related. So the levensbeschouwelijke groei. But it's not defined what is meant with this levensbeschouwelijke groei. So when we look into the curricula, we see on the one hand, the emphasis on the Christian tradition, on the Roman Catholic tradition, which is the primus inter pares, which is a source of reference, which is the basis of the schools and of the school subject. At the same time, levensbeschouwelijk seems also to imply non-religious worldviews and other than Roman Catholic worldviews. And often levensbeschouwelijk also refers to personal identity formation. So let's say the new curricula, they emphasized Christian tradition, the Catholic tradition. At the same time, there is this openness for others and this recognition of plurality, and the idea that the subject should foster or contribute to personal identity formation, and so to personal worldviews. And you can also see this in the three perspectives that are mentioned in the curriculum, which is first the Christian faith or the tradition, so the Catholic faith, then the plurality and the context of the pupils and of the classroom, and then the identity of the pupils. So when we're talking about levensbeschouwelijke groei, it's in the Roman Catholic curriculum, it's always like these three things that are focused on. So, okay, you can continue, I think. Good. Then in official schools, as mentioned, there is separative religious education. And you can, wait, I think we missed a slide. Is that possible? Catholic schools and one higher? No, official schools. Yeah, you can. Okay, no. Here is in official schools. Yes, of course, these schools are also characterized by secularization and diversity, and RE is organized there in a separative way, and that raises, of course, issues with regard to dialogue, mutual understanding. That is possible in the Catholic education classes because their students with diverse religious affiliations are they gather together, but in official schools this is not the case. Another challenge, I think, is that there is only RE in official schools in the recognized religions or worldview. So if we have RE in official schools, it's at this moment in these 7 worldviews. I think it's also good to know that there is no full-fledged alternative for exempted students. So if we talk about worldviews and about the nons and about the fact that many students actually say they don't have a worldview in the sense of an institutional or recognized worldview, what happens in practice is that these students, they are just separated from the rest of their class. They get a seat in another class or at the office or whatever, and the parents are required to give them study material to study their worldview, but often these students do not have a worldview. Sometimes they have, sometimes these are Jehovah Witnesses, but this is not always the case. I think, and also important to know is that there have been new curricula, not only for Roman Catholic education, but also for non-denominational ethics and for Islam, for instance. But they remain, of course, in the denominational framework. It's the religious and groups and the humanists who organize the courses. They are confessional or semi-confessional, and what we do not have in Belgium is a religious-based perspective in education. Yes. Then, very important, I think, also, if we talk about worldviews or levensbeschouwingen, is a recent or quite recent initiative of the recognized religions and the humanists, and that is the development of interreligious competencies. And here you see the word in Dutch, interlevensbeschouwelijke competenties. They were developed by these groups, the recognized humanists and the recognized religions, about more than 10 years ago. And since 2018, these competencies must be part of all the RE curricula in all the school networks. Now, it's a very brief document, actually, these interlevensbeschouwelijke competenties. So it's not it's not very much. And they remain in the same institutional framework. And they're based on 3 clusters, and you see in every cluster the word worldview is mentioned. Me and my worldview, me, my worldview, and the other's worldview, and me, my worldview, and society. It resembles a bit also what I mentioned for the Catholic curricula, this idea of the Catholic identity, the plurality, and the own identity. But the question is also here, what is meant by worldview? And I have the impression that worldview in these interlevensbeschouwelijke competenties is mainly referring to the recognized worldviews, because it's the recognized worldviews who invented these competencies, and they suppose actually that all the students in the classroom have a worldview, and that these worldviews are mainly the ones that are recognized in Belgium. At the same time as in the Roman Catholic curriculum, the interlevensbeschouwelijke competenties also emphasize the importance of personal worldview, persoonlijke levensbeschouwing, and this identity formation. Okay, I will skip this about citizenship. Good. Now, these interreligious competencies, it's actually, so they have been developed in 2012, and it was actually the first time that the different recognized religions work together Before that, they were actually enemies. Someone who was part of the humanists was actually an enemy of someone who was part of Roman Catholic, the Roman Catholic part. So, but they felt like this societal pressure that plurality and RE was challenged by this new societal situation, and then they decided no longer to be enemies, but just to join and to develop these interreligious competencies. But in practice, it's not that much, because the advised time or the recommended time for these practicing these competencies is only 6 hours a year. And if you know that in Belgium we have every week 2 hours of religious education or non-denominational ethics, then 6 hours it's almost nothing. It's just you can better do nothing, maybe. And how do they organize it in practice? Well, in Catholic schools, of course, you cannot organize a teacher from, or you cannot bring together a teacher from humanism and from Islam and from Catholicism, because there is only the teacher of Roman Catholicism. So these teachers, they invite representatives of other religions' worldviews, and then you see again that it's mainly the typical recognized religions. They invite an imam or a rabbi or someone from the humanist freethinkers. So that often happens then. Or they visit the Jewish museum or something like that, or they organize cross-curricular projects. In official schools, the implementation is different. There is this cooperation between the different RE teachers and non-denominational ethics, and then they work together, for instance, on a topic of I don't know, migration, or what happens now in Palestine, and so on and so forth. So that's actually how these interlevensbeschouwelijke competencies are put into practice in the both school networks. Yes. Okay, also important to notice is that in the present Flemish government agreement, there is a sentence included, and the recognized religions and the humanists, they couldn't sleep from that single sentence, because it mentions that in official schools there will be a shift to 2 hours a week on interreligious dialogue in the timetable. And people organizing the RE classes, they were not informed at all, and they were afraid of losing their jobs and so on and so forth. But it's not at all clear what actually will happen, because first we have the constitution, which requires official schools to organize RE in the recognized religions. So it's not that easy to just switch to interreligious dialogue. It's also not sure, will it just be this continuation of this 6 or an expansion of these 6 hours a week we have already of these interreligious competencies. In that case, it just remains a school subject in the hands of the recognized religions and the humanists, and that's of course not the same as we have, for instance, in Norway or in Sweden. There are also questions about the organization, who will organize it, the state or the religions and the humanists. What about the RE teachers and so on? So it's very unclear, but there is really kind of fear among those representatives of the recognized religions. Also important is that this sentence it's only for official schools, so only for state schools, which is only 30 to 40% of the schools. Okay, I think this is my last, or almost my last, no, almost.
Just Leni,
yeah.
If you could bring it to a close, because it's been about 20 minutes.
Yeah,
so.
Okay. So just very quick, I think there is a tension between the religious affiliation of the students and the way we organize RE. This raises also questions about, we use the word worldview, but what is meant by this? Is this the recognized worldview? It is in individual worldview, no worldview at all? What do we do with constitutive bindings and so on? That's not always clear. These interreligious competencies, they remain in the denominational framework, and as they are only organized for 6 hours a week, I don't think that people will be really religiously literate with these competencies. So there may be better alternatives, I think, than what we have. One is non-denominational RE for all the students, similar as in Norway, in Sweden, also in the UK, but it's a bit complicated there, I think. The proposal of the Netherlands, which Markus mentioned, I think that could also be inspiring for Belgium, because we have a similar pillarized education system. And finally, it's also very important to mention, I think, is that in Belgium, we do not have religious studies at our universities. We only have theology, and we only have universities where you can study moraalwetenschappen, which moral philosophy, but it's not exactly the same, but this prepares you to become a humanist teacher. So we do not have religious studies, and of course that's also one of the reasons, I think, why the status quo remains. Okay, thanks.
Super, thank you, Leni. That was excellent. Thank you to all the speakers. I mean, I have some questions, but let's first just quickly, if the speakers want to respond with any comments, comparisons, anyone in the audience can pose questions also to all three. You know, you can make remarks. It would also be interesting to have other national perspectives. You know, we have people from Germany here, the United States, etc. Quite different contexts. So first, just to quickly to the speakers, any comparative comments, reflections?
Yeah, if I may, in any case, I have a question for Trevor. Something that I also struggled with together with my students last week when we read some of your stuff, Trevor, where you're over here. The thing is, when I first read the report, the Cowley report in 2018, I got the impression that that when you wanted to introduce a worldview, that organized worldviews or traditions was the main thing, so that the main thrust was to move beyond factual knowledge to insight into how organized worldviews worked. But when I now hear you speak today, and also when I read some of your recent articles, it seems that I may have gotten that wrong, because you now seem to emphasize personal worldview as the most important things. And now when you say we're interested in teaching pupils how worldview works, do you then mean how personal worldview works, or how personal worldviews get developed, steered interpretation, and perhaps draw on institutional religions in this process? I mean, if that's what you mean, then I wonder what discipline academic discipline we're anchoring the subject in. It seemed then to be a combination of philosophy and psychology, perhaps more so than religious studies and theology, and that worries me a little bit. Perhaps partly because of my own bias, but also because we need to have a structure, a place somebody who can teach these teachers.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Good question. First, the role of the commission report was what I call, it was a pebble in a pond creating ripples, rather than being the sort of like the 10 Commandments which Moses brought down from the mountain. So we tried to treat it as a jumping off point, because they never really defined what they meant by worldview in that report. So it was the start of a discussion. We've had a huge process since. We've had 2 big projects. And the little document that I put up the front cover from is the result of all that. And that has developed the whole thing. So it's been a transition from one to where we are now, from the commission to where we are now. I think I may have given you the wrong impression, because your religion and worldview sort of construction is exactly how we look at it, in the sense that they do study the organized traditions. So the content is very much the study of the religious and non-religious traditions, but the framing of how it's dealt with is very different. given a worldviews approach, because the framing in the world religions paradigm, as interpreted by teachers, was very much about give them information, give them information, give them information. The framing in a religion and worldviews approach, as we interpret it, is about how do you interpret this information? How do you understand it? How do you learn from the people that you're studying? And so on and so forth. So it actually moves from neutral to, I would say, formative. In other words, we're looking at a non-confessional formative approach to the study of religion. And if I just make a comment about humanism, because we very definitely include humanism within the traditions that are studied. The objection that came was it was seen as a takeover by humanism, which was actually nonsense. But that was the misunderstanding that we battled against.
So if you just make it to clarify, and then I'll shut up. So some of the stuff that you capture in England by the term worldview is what we in the Dutch context capture with the term perspective. So
Yes.
I talk about these 10 perspectives, but really there are 3. So we want people to be able to sort of move between their own perspective, religious. I don't know how. I used to talk about this in Dutch, of course. Binnenperspective, the perspective, the inside of their own insider perspective, and they want them to sort of place themselves into the insider perspective of others, but also put up an outsider's perspective, more found in religious studies, which to look at how traditions work.
Yeah, and we want them to learn how to be dialoguers and how to be interpreters.
Yeah.
That's the sort of fundamental formational side of it.
Okay. Oh.
Super. Any other comments, Leni or Trevor? Things you wanted to mention while listening to the others, or we can move to questions. No? Okay, then Irena, I have as the first person to pose a question.
Yeah, thank you to all 3 of you. It's really good to see to have this European view and the plurality and the diversity we have in Europe. And I don't know if that's a good thing. I think diversity is certainly in the spirit of the days. It's always a good thing. I myself operate in the German context where we have a federal system, so we have another national diversity. And here the world religious paradigm is very much still in place, although it has been criticized for quite some time now. And I would like to preface my questions to, I have a bunch of them, I'm going to pick out some, with maybe a spicy comment that possibly it's the case that we are using or inflating the worldview terminology a little bit too much in order to counter criticisms of the world religious paradigms without filling it with concrete examples. So my first question would be to all 3 speakers to illustrate on the basis of a real example at what, let's say, ontological building blocks we're actually looking at with the students if we don't look at the basic elements of a world religion, but now are teaching them or letting them explore a worldview. Could you make it more like an illustration on a real example?
Who wants to take that on?
Yeah, maybe. But I'm not sure whether it's an answer to your question. But there have been, for Islamic religious education, there have very recently been new curricula and study material, and it's very, very different from the former curricula in this sense that the former ones, they just thought like Islam as just one thing. It's Sunni Islam and it's actually Moroccan, maybe a bit Turkish, but that's it. And it was just like, this is Islam. And now you see that the developers of this new curriculum and of the new study material, that they see that in the classroom, it's not just Islam, but the students, they all have different worldviews. They have different interpretations of Islam, of how they practice and what they believe or what they don't believe, and this is very much taken into account in the new curricula and in the study materials. But I'm not sure whether that's a good example of what you're looking for, but it is in Belgium. It's a clear. It's a huge difference between just seeing Islam as one thing, which I think in the worldview, world religions approach was also a mistake, that it's just we have Islam and we have the book and the Prophet and blah blah blah, and now it's just more open to this diversity. So maybe this, I'm not sure whether it's a good example, but this is something that happened at least in these curricula.
Yeah, just to clarify, maybe before, I would like to leave it open to others. So it's a differentiation according to believing and belonging a little bit, because this is what has been missing also in the education. So how much the distinction of believing a religion on just belonging to it this is a very significant differentiation and distinction for my students, certainly. So that it seems to be with Leni's answer that's a little more enclosed now. What about the other contributors? I'd be very interested to hear more examples.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing in the Netherlands is definitely not a break with the worldview paradigm. It's more an enrichment of it, a restoration to it as it should have been. So central here. So we also work with SMART's model, for example. But the way it's been used often is just to give a bunch of facts about these different dimensions, whereas we also, as smart ones, point out how things are related, and that there's try to reflect on what might be the core of a particular tradition. But not only that, we also throw in some more religion, some more Robert Jackson approach towards it. These are not super original ideas, but we try to bring together in that way. Makes sense.
Yeah, I can give you a very specific example. So we have a shrine in Norfolk called Walsingham, dedicated to Mary, a Catholic shrine. There's seen a piece of work developed on that around the notion of pilgrimage. Primary teachers before would often interpret that by children doing pictures of the shrine or something, learning about the journey that people make to the shrine, that sort of thing. What's done in the new approach is to actually explore much more about what's the motivation of the pilgrims and how do they experience the pilgrimage differently. And then maybe the children would be given a question about, can you imagine yourself on such a pilgrimage? What would be the barriers to your doing it? What would you find very challenging? And so on and so forth. So it's not a sort of big change in topics in one sense. And one of the things that we've done in the project is to try and produce quite a lot of exemplary material to show how it can be seen. And what we're trying to do is to offer what we've talked about as a core curriculum. We call it a statement of entitlement, which can be interpreted very differently in different school contexts. But it changes the focus from the information to understanding the human response and motivation a lot more.
Super.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. By the way, I think we only put an hour and a half in the calendar. If people want to continue after 4:30, which is in 15 minutes or 10 minutes, we can, of course, who would like to stay in the room, keep talking. So in the list now, I see Zrinka, Victor, Anne, and Anna. So Zrinka.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was so highly inspiring, and I have a very grounding question, so to say. Firstly, what I like, or what I find very, very inspiring, is that terminological approach to teach children to think. And the question, it's all around, and even the last example that Leni gave about the Islam, etc., which is coming from Herenstam from the 80s, that he firstly, for the first time, mentioned that there is textbook Islam, and there is no the Islam, and now we are in 2025, we are still talking about that. So, but that's not the point. What I want to ask, and it's a little bit connected with what Irene mentioned about ontological perspection, is that if we want to teach children to think in a way, then and I connect that with what Markus, what you described with perspectives. It is both a systemic approach. That means it is connecting so many different, not only perspectives, but ways of lives and experiencing the lives and the basic where does the experience come from, etc. And from my understanding, this is the problem with that, which firstly, the inspiration is the thinking. It is not the believing or non-believing, belonging or non-belonging, but just this. And this is the first thing I've heard in the study of religion with Peter Antes many, many years ago. He always used to say religions are thinking systems. So, and not only religions, but it was study of religion. But here the question is, and now I'm asking the question from my current project and from that ontological plurality and from classical and quantum, etc. The young people are connected with AI today. They are connected with the whole world, and they don't ask which religion is what. They ask what is reality. Who cares about reality? Who cares if I'm online all the time if I like it? So my question is, if we are dealing with the youth, with the young people who are ontologically in different worlds, and the worlds offer them so many different things, wouldn't it not be necessary to start to differentiate between classical and non-classical or classical and quantum, in the sense that we are opening there the space that all the questions we have here are systemic question about what we have here. And I'm not jumping into that what is worldview and what is not worldview, but everything is based in classical science. It is based in universalistic thinking, universalistic education, intercultural education, etc., etc. And they transcend that already. So this is, and that example of a student who said, I don't care about reality is that example. I don't know if that is clear enough, but I'm just asking myself what to do with those who are jumping into parallel universes, who are not as is it worldview or not, but just how to grasp that, how to go hermeneutically in ontological plurality, how to step out of that systemic approach, which is only connected systems we see here or we have worked with in the last 200 years in science, And this is one question, and I hope it's clear in a way. I work in Germany, and we have such a long history of religious education. Then in the 80s came the ethics education in all 16 countries. There is a huge dichotomy between the religious people as such, the secular people as such, in the textbooks. And it cannot be the future that we change the education. For example, now we have a trend that Catholic and Protestant religious education come together, and the Islamic religious education is flourishing for itself. So is this the future, or that it is substituted by ethical education? But I don't think that's the future, because it doesn't offer the alternative, a new thinking alternative, so to say. But if we go, or this is Lebensgestaltung, Ethik, Religionskunde, this is very old and it's very interesting. But the question is here, just let me see where I wrote the question.
Zrinka, maybe they can already start answering.
Yes, please.
A lot of questions.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, if I can just make a comment, if you have a student who says, I'm not interested in reality, or that is already is the beginning of a conversation, because that's a very interesting point of view. So it seems to me that a sort of world religions approach wouldn't really offer much to that sort of student, because you're saying to them, well, we're not interested in what you think. There are all these systems out here, religions and non-religious traditions. You're going to learn about them because the authorities are telling you you're going to learn about them. So that's one way in which I think traditionally, and certainly in England, we've attempted to do it. They're there, you will learn about them. But that doesn't address the students' understanding of the world and their attempts to work out where they identify. Whereas I think what a worldviews approach, certainly in the way it's being developed in England, it takes that seriously. It wants to bring that, the position of the student in, to the study. And basically, it's helping the student understand that none of us approach these big questions objectively in the sense that we park our own views. We're always influenced by our own views, and therefore they are part of what needs to be studied or reflected on in the lessons where you're trying to deal with some of these really big issues.
If I may, so in the Dutch case, I mean, this is not built in; these things are not built into our curriculum, and that has also to do with. How should I say that? I mean, it's already a big step for some of the more theoretically confessionally inclined teachers to open up to other religions and a more study of religion way of approaching things. But some of the students that I've educated myself from a religious studies background, they take up some of these things as things to be studied. So they would do Wicca and Jediism and reality shifting and stuff that are closer to many pupils' everyday work. Well, the pupils' experience, but then connect them still to solid study of religion theory. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I can also add from my philosophical background. Maybe I think Socratic dialogue can be also a good tool. As Trevor mentioned, the student says something, and this is a good opportunity to ask questions and and I think every future and present RE teacher should actually know how to do this Socratic dialogue, because it can really foster very interesting perspectives of the students. In my own experience, I've been it was for pragmatic reasons. Actually, I've been a Roman Catholic RE teacher for 3 years. And because there are no jobs for philosophers in Belgium, actually, and but I'm baptized, but I'm not. I don't believe, actually. I'm an atheist, so it was a bit strange that I've been teaching that. And the students, they also asked questions like, and do you go to church, and do you pray? And then rather than answering, I just questioned back, and I said, do you have to pray in order to be a Roman Catholic? Do you have to go to church in order to be a Roman Catholic? And I think that's something that is very useful and that also breaks up with the typical world religions paradigm, because you make room for other perspectives, and but you have to be able, of course, to manage it. And that's the reason why I think that every future teacher, you have to learn. It's just not something you can do out of the blue.
Super, thank you. Victor, then Anne, then Anna, then I put myself on there if we get to me.
Thanks a lot to all of you. That was really great. I have a question, perhaps especially for Trevor and Leni. I'm not sure it's the same situation really in the Netherlands, but it might be. I'm wondering about the role that worldview education, the shift to worldview education, has played in public debate and politics. In that it seemed to me that both in Flanders and in England, there was actually really part of a public debate. In England, from what I've read from the article you circulated, Trevor, it seemed to be about sort of anti-woke sentiments, that worldview is just part of the woke nonsense, and we want to just talk about one reality and that sort of stuff, and Christian values, because we're a Christian country. And in Flanders, it seemed to be about the role of Islam in society, and also therefore mobilize perhaps by liberals, perhaps by populists, about how come so many of our youth go to the Islamic State, that sort of stuff, right? So I'm wondering, because we're very interested in the role that worldview plays in cultural wars in our project, I'm wondering how the role that it has played in public debate, and the role also, the intervention that you think worldview education can play in cultural wars. The contemporary cultural wars.
Yeah. In Flanders, the debate has been influenced indeed by what happened in Norway and Sweden. So we've seen that actually during my PhD, I recognized that the way we organize RE is not the only way of organizing RE, and it was actually something new, although it existed already for many years in other parts of Europe. But most of the people in Belgium were absolutely not aware of that. And so then, together with a colleague, we brought this concept of religious studies-based RE to the floor in Belgium, and it got media attention, and it was taken up by politicians and so on and so forth. But of course, those defending the current situation, they immediately made a caricature of it, and they said like, oh, you want to study religions as similar as you study a painting in a museum. You just look at it and then you see the book, the man, and so on, and that's it. So they immediately took it for granted that if you study religions in a non-denominational or non-confessional way, that it is with this with this world religions approach. So, and then of course, we also got to know that there are other perspectives like Bob Jackson and so on and so forth. And then we brought this into the debate. But it was, it was really those who defend the status quo. They often use this world religion paradigm in order to attack religious studies based RE, because then they say this is bad what you will do. So that's typical what we had in Flanders. I forgot the second part of your question.
How it was part of sort of culture wars, more or less populist or liberal critiques of the role of Islam in society, for example, of attempts to de-radicalize youth, if that seemed to be part of it.
But there are two directions you can go to. For instance, the attacks in Paris and in Brussels, they speeded up the debate, and then these interreligious competencies, they were already developed, but then they were, let's say, they were implemented in law in 2018. So this was triggered by these terrorist attacks and by radicalization. But then there are, I think, broadly two ways to go, and one way is the way we currently go, and that is revising the curricula. And like, for instance, the Muslims, they did really lots of effort to have now a good curriculum and good study material. That's one direction. The other direction is just to rethink the whole RE system, but that's much more complicated, and I don't see that happening in the very near future. But we'll see. Maybe the Flemish government agreement will give surprises, but I don't think so, actually.
Yeah, I mean, in England, I think there have been two main sources of conflict. One has been a defense of the traditional approach to teaching religious education as scholarly, and the basis of that has been a sense that that going down the world religions approach just turns it into an exchange of opinions. So that's been one thing. So in one sense, that could be called an anti-woke reaction. But the other one is largely from within Christianity, but very much a rejection of the sort of liberalization idea, very anti sort of the woke thing comes up there. I mean, my own personal observation is that we are shifting much more into a culture war situation. We're moving in the same way as America. We're not that far down the road as they are, but it feels like that with our politics. I mean, my contention would be that what the shift is about is, first of all, is about, this is to answer Markus's question, that we want to develop a tradition based around what is it to be a good student of religion, what's involved in that. But the difference is that we're saying it's not that you become an objective, neutral scholar, that you are an involved person and that you're learning to be an interpreter. So it's a shift from a more scientific approach to a more hermeneutical approach. And the second thing I'd say is that we are responding very much to the need for, I suppose, teaching children how to be citizens in a diverse society where conflict is the name of the game, and how do we deal with meeting difference. That's very strong. The government, it depends who's in charge and who you're talking to, but currently there is interest in sort of putting this much more into the legislative structure. But that could change, because you never know what the politicians are going to do really from day to day.
Super, thanks. Anne Taves.
Okay, yeah, thank you to the presenters. This has been really interesting. I mostly have a few comments. The situation in the United States is, I think, really pretty different because we've never had religious education in the public schools. Of course, you know, there are a range of private schools and those are growing. But it's been really fascinating for me to watch how discussions of worldviews has taken off in Europe, and really is not that much of a discussion in the US, apart from, as we heard with the speaker on Calvinism, within Christian circles where they're promoting the notion of worldviews. In a way, I'm really glad it hasn't entered into the culture wars in the US. I just am terrified to think what would be happening right now if it had. Anyway, so enough on the US. Trevor, I would be really interested if you could put in the chat the title of the new book, and if there's a way to get a hold of it, I'd really like to be able to read that. And then last, on the practical example front, the Barnet, I think it's a school district, it's outside of London, picked up on the way that I've been approaching worldviews in terms of big questions, and consulted with me, and they have incorporated a big questions approach to worldviews in, I guess it's kindergarten through high school education. So they've translated it very much within the kind of framework that Trevor's been talking about. So as a way, starting with the youngest kids to reflect both on how they would think about the big questions, translated into things that would make sense for little kids. But then hearing the views of others, and then gradually introducing the more institutional worldviews, I think, over time as the curriculum develops, with, my impression is, a much more philosophical and sophisticated look at how different approaches to the big questions at the high school level. So yeah, Trevor, if you could just tell us how we can keep following some of the discussions in England, I'd be really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm putting it in the chat at the moment, so I'll do that.
Okay, great.
Super. Okay, Anna, I think you had two questions, but maybe just one for now.
You're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry. Thank you for that. That was fascinating. On a very quick note, in Spain, my child goes to early childhood education, and they're in the public system of the Comunidad Autónoma, because there it's like by regions. Each region decides what they want to do with their religious education. There's nothing like worldview education in Spain. And in his school that's public, they do religious education from early childhood. But the kids that do not want to be there because the families decide not to, like mine, they go to something called alternative. In this alternative, teachers give them review of what they've seen in class. And this has created a whole havoc, at least in our school, because families, they feel that it's unfair to the children who go to religious education, because these children are getting additional training of normal classes, and they've been requesting that something else is offered. So I found this very fascinating when it happened. So just on a small note. And regarding the question, I have actually 3. Feel free to answer any of them. Todd is going to kill me, but yes. So ecological paradigms within worldview education and religious education in the curriculums, like where is that standing at? Integration with EU recommendations on intercultural communication, because EU doesn't talk about worldview education as far as I'm concerned. They do intercultural. So how does that weave in the curriculum? And the third one, which came up afterwards, how is death dealt with in the switch from religious education, where each denomination has a very clear intake on death and afterlife, in the new worldview education, like death and grief and all of that ritual is it's like, how is that weaved in? Feel free to answer one or none to the 3 of you. And yeah, thanks.
I'm glad you didn't just ask one question instead of 2, but 3. You got all 3 in. Okay. Anybody? Ecology, death, and EU recommendations.
On EU recommendations, and because you've mentioned the dreaded word Brexit and everything, we've had a huge conversation with the whole European developments via Bob Jackson's work and the projects that he's led. And it's been very influential in the way in which our thinking has developed. So I think most religious educators in the UK would still think of themselves as European rather than just as being English isolates. So yeah, there's a lot of notice taken of that.
Maybe I can add just a few words also about EU recommendations. I think they're formulated in such a broad way that in Belgium, those who defend a denominational approach, but then say, yeah, we have some common courses on interreligious dialogue, they say, look, this is as in the EU guidelines. We are defending another religious studies-based approach, also say, look, that would be better because it's better in line with these recommendations. So yeah, it's just a quick note about it, but that's how the situation is in Belgium. And I think they are formulated in such a broad way that, and I think also in Signpost, it is explicitly mentioned that also faith-based schools should be helped with these signposts, and that means that, yeah, you can also implement education about religions or worldviews in these denominational classes, which happens in Belgium. And then they say, look, we're doing a good job because it's in line with the EU recommendations.
Super. Markus, any
yeah, in the Netherlands, these recommendations are completely unknown among teachers, among at the Ministry of Education. They are uninfluential. I mean, I refer to them sometimes to back up what I'm doing, but they don't really help me. But I can speak a bit to the other question also. It's not playing a huge role in the curriculum that we are developing, but some of it is in there. I mean, many teachers are very much interested in in the ecological crisis, they see that their pupils are interested in that as well, and they want to weave that into the school subject. But it is something that we could do a little bit, but it can also, we also have in the Netherlands a social science subject that can also take it up. So it's does not belong to the core of our issues, but sometimes some teachers bring it in also when they discuss different ethical issues. Yeah. But here, I mean, we're probably, I mean, we're moving also because we want to do something that everybody can recognize themselves in. We are not drawing in we are not super much pioneers here, probably.
Thanks. Okay, I had a sort of a question myself, or a comment maybe that could lead to some questions. From the historical perspective, I find the impact of, let's say, depillarization, secularization, fascinating for the evolution of this particular school subject. And on the one hand, it seems that this depillarization, I think from a, let's say, liberal cosmopolitan perspective, we would welcome it, you know, breaking down of boundaries between different social confessional groups. But at the same time, that seems to produce innovation in religious education, but potentially also threatens the entire subject itself, because the basis of religious education as a subject comes out of confessional structures that come out of culture wars to an extent, at least in the Netherlands. So, you know, what's the relationship between innovation and threat that comes from the depillarization? Is sort of a question I had. And then I also find it fascinating that that secularization is impacting the framework in which religious education takes place. And then we see this beautiful distinction between the three countries, right? So in Flanders, the state is defining people's religious identities and then giving them to a certain educational pathway because of that state ascription. Whereas in the Netherlands, it's the school structures that are confessionalized. Whereas in the UK, there seems to be more universal idea of religious education, from what I see. So it's fascinating that secularization is both changing the structures at the same time as changing the content. It's changing also the norms and then the motivations, because it seems that behind a lot of the developments, there's an anxiety about social dislocation and lack of values to bind society together. So I don't know. Those are just a few remarks. I'm curious how you see also this idea that is secularization threatening the entire subject, and is the move to worldview the sign of the end of RE, or is it saving RE?
I'd like to speak to that, if I may.
Sure.
So I think, so in the Dutch case, it is not secularization itself, perhaps. I think that was a threat to our school subject, but it was via this alternative subject that was called worldview that we talked about, because that became so vague. When it's about relations and the body and all these kind of themes are not about religions anymore. It's the least popular school subject of all, if you ask pupils, because it's turned into so there's a tension here between an attempt to speak about things that are close to the personal experience of the pupils, but it's taught primarily by boomers, so it just doesn't work. And I think actually one of the things we're doing with levensbeschouwing is try to emphasize religion more than worldview, actually. So funnily enough, when I was looking at the proofs of this book that came out, the first levensbeschouwing book, first I had been persuaded to use worldview or levensbeschouwing. It's a core term throughout, so a chapter. The chapter on the phenomenological approach or perspective, for example, it had first as a title, a subtitle, how do levensbeschouwingen, what's the structure of levensbeschouwingen? But at the end I thought, no, almost all the organized worldviews that we look at are religions, and it's too confusing to have worldview as the main term. So change it all back to religion in many of the chapters of this book. So perhaps that may seem to contradict what I said before. I don't know, but I'm also probably too tired now to be very clear.
Can I respond to that? Because I agree absolutely with that, Markus. And we had a battle over what was the title of this new approach. And religion and worldviews was very important. Worldviews was rejected. So it's a subject primarily about the conversation that students have with the religious traditions. Because if you go just to worldviews, you end up with all sorts of sort of psychological, sociological education. So that was one thing that was very important in the English context. And if I can just respond to your question, Todd, right at the very beginning about what brought us into this worldview world, if you like. And for me, it was my attempt in my doctorate to think about how conservative Christian teachers relate to the sort of modern religious education. Can they, does it work for them? And that took me into the Dutch Reformed theological tradition and Kuyper and all the influences in America of that. And it seemed to me that there was huge potential in the worldview idea, but not in its use as, if you like, a culture wars tool or an apologetic tool to sort of say, you know, this is why you're wrong and we're right, and dismiss people, but as a tool to actually engage in dialogue and religious interaction, whilst remaining very clear to your own commitments and tradition. So it was a flipping, if you like, that seemed to me to be important. So that's where it all started for me with Kuyper.
Your microphone, Todd.
Yeah, I have a problem. Wait.
Off my mic. I was just saying, if we finish in 5 minutes, I think we'll be happy at 5 o'clock. So any final remarks from anyone? Markus wanted to say something, I think.
No, I just want to say that you should turn your mic. But now that I have the word, I mean, I think in the Netherlands, what's really going on, I think that might be good to get out here, is there is a power struggle between three academic disciplines about in which of them or in which combination this the school service should be anchored. So it used to be dominated by theology, but philosophy and the study of religion are both moving into the scene. And what I've seen in the Netherlands is that where the school subjects are called levensbeschouwing, it becomes for me too philosophical. So my position as this power struggle is to anchor it mainly or more than it has been in the study of religion. And here I found that I can better ally myself with the theologians than with the philosophers.
Great, thank you. So quick remarks, Leni.
Thanks, Markus. Just adding 2 comments to Todd is first about the structures and the changes in the pillarized system. We have also this depillarization in Belgium, but not in education. So we're very good at reaching compromises, and it's typically Belgium that we have still, in spite of the secularization of the student population and of the population as a whole, that we still have this Catholic education system with 2 hours Roman Catholic RE, and what they do is just maintain the structure but rethink the RE content, but the institutional structure, that's just the same as in 1830. So it's that's something I wanted to add. And second is that you mentioned secularization, and will it? What about RE in the future in this secularized context? Will we go to no RE at all, or what with the world views paradigm and so on and so forth? But it's, of course, it's not only secularization, but it's also diversity. So, and we see, for instance, in Flanders, that the traditional Catholic bloc that diminished, but at the same time, there are the Muslims, and they they really like the Belgian RE system, because a large group of Muslims, they really want religious education in their own religion as it is organized in the state schools. So they are very, very happy with it. And also interesting in it in this way is that the free-thinking humanists, they've always been strongly against the pillarized education system, and they've been very strongly opposed to the system of recognizing religions and of organizing RE in the recognized religions in the state schools. And they try to lobby, and they try to have politicians on board and so on and so forth, but they couldn't change the system. So they said in 1993, okay, if we can't change the system, we just be part of the system. And that's just how it happens. And I think it's maybe in Belgium it will continue. Now we have the Buddhists requiring recognitions. We have the the Hindus. So that's also a way to to go further. I don't think it's the best way to deal with it, but until today, this is the way that people in Belgium manage diversity and secularization in RE.
Super. Okay, well, we've run to the end of time. Any 30 seconds, Irena and Victor? Any?
I can do 15 seconds. As a practitioner that I am, I want to end on an optimistic note, because the worldview approach helps to solve a whole array of problems in my teaching. So thanks for that. On a negative or kind of pessimistic note, as a theorist, if we don't understand how the educational system works and how fragmented it is in making decisions, we won't change anything. So we have to think about the infrastructure and the institution a little bit more to really change and put our great ideas into practice.
Super, thank you. Victor?
Yes, on a similar note, actually, I just wanted to mention that we are trying to set up an Enlight network, so a network of different universities that should be part of the Enlight Federation, which is quite restrictive, but actually we're also very interested in getting in touch with, as the EU calls them, stakeholders, practitioners, organizations of teachers, and so on, to keep working on Worldview. So this seminar series hopefully will continue as part of this future network. But one of the axes that we're interested in working on is how a worldview approach is being used in different practical domains and in policy to sort of bridge conflicts or to limit the effects of cultural wars, that sort of stuff. And so if you're interested in this, do get in touch with us. We would be very, very interested in hearing from you as we're preparing this application for funding to do this, and we'll do all sorts of events, educational as well as research events.
Yeah, so maybe we can close just to say, first of all, thank you to the three speakers. That was really, the presentations were much better, because Trevor had said we already rehearsed everything in a meeting we had 2 weeks back. This was much better, much clearer. It was wonderful. So thank you all for the clarity, and the slides were very helpful. Just to continue for a second on what Victor was saying. So now I'm segueing into the business meeting. Congratulations on the speeches. Thank you very much for the discussion. But the practical thing is looking towards the future. I've mentioned to all of you before, we would like to continue to work with teachers of RE, educationalists. So I hope that all of you here in the room, also Irena, to include you since you're a teacher, what could we do next in the future over the coming years, really? How might our project working on history, theories of worldview, discussions more broadly, how could we bring teachers of RE into this conversation? I'd like to talk to you all about that. So just to let you know, that will be coming up. And then what Victor mentioned is there's a bit of funding through this Enlight network, and none of your universities except for Srinka's is connected, but the rest of you aren't, but doesn't matter. It would just be a bit of funding to help us work together collectively. It would just mean we focus also on some other partners. So as part of that, we would also love to propose something on working on the theme of worldview and RE. So I hope that we can all stay in touch. If any